You're listening to Superpower Up with multidimensional master, superpower expert, and former counterintelligence agent, Tonya If you're ready to disrupt reality, then sit down, strap in, and prepare to experience the show that proves there is no spoon.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya your superpower expert. And today we're expanding on last week's show of Living by Christ's Design with Dave Stone. And today's episode is Spirit and Superpowers. And the reason why we're coming back on and talking about this stuff is because there was so much complexity, right, that gets brought up when we talk about living as the divine, walking the world as the divine, modeling after what we think Christ's teachings were, all of that stuff. Where does ego come into it? Where does humility come into it? How do we do this and not succumb to just the headiness of it all, right? And how do we make sure that we're walking in alignment with the divine and what that guidance is, and not, veering too far to the left or the right of either too much, self-deprecation or I'm not worthy, or too much, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's a struggle, right? That's a walk that a lot of people are on. It's like their own razor's edge. And if you don't take a look at these questions and say, okay, well, how do we know, right? What is the true gauge that we can use to know? Because I don't know about you all, but I'm highly intelligent, very educated. I'm capable of rationalizing just about anything to myself. And it's, you have to kind of ask yourself those things. Am I a trustworthy source of information in those moments? Is somebody that I know a trustworthy source of information in those moments? And not only that personal experience with it, but how do we reconcile, we throw a lot of terms around here, like God, spirit, the divine, abstract frequency, Christian, Christ, consciousness, Christianity, religion, spiritual, how do we start making sense of it all? And how much do we water it down or make it kind of wishy-washy if we start to merge terms? Is it possible to kind of put all that stuff together and find some sort of thread and symbolism in it all, and not deviate from just the awesome power within it all, right? Because it's once you start kind of throwing everything into the pot, it all kinds of gets mushed up together, and sometimes the potency of the messages get lost in that process. And there's so much confusion in this, right? Like I know we hear from you all. We know you're listening and you're trying to make sense of it all. And sometimes we have different aspects of ourselves where it just doesn't make sense, right? And it's our own form of obstinance and resistance. But at the same time, it's like we desperately want to understand, and we in aspects of it just simply cannot, right? We're trying to comprehend oneness with a very finite, limited human mind, right? And so how do we kind of navigate all of those things? And so where I want to start with that today is the idea of spirit, right? I know a lot of you talk about spirit and communing with spirit. And yet when we then try to kind of bridge that gap into let's say, well, since we're talking about the episode I did with Dave, kind of the Christian doctrine and the Holy Spirit, right? Well, the Holy Spirit and the Christian Trinity has a very different kind of feel to a lot of people because of that construct and because of collective stories and wounds around that, and versus spirit, right? In the more kind of woo-woo, metaphysical, kind of spiritual spaces. Well, what if they're one and the same, right? And so how do we kind of abide by our own guidance and our own kind of path that we're walking, because we do believe that everybody has their own individual path. We're put together in these very complex ways by design on purpose and put into specific environments and specific experiences and specific geography and whatever the case may be, because there is something specific that you are able to do in a way that nobody else can, right? That's the uniqueness in our design. And so at Superpower Experts, we start people off in superpower design. We look at what are your predisposed superpowers. And I get it, folks. Recognize when we talk about this stuff, ultimately what we're doing is upgrading your operating system, right? That's the work that across the board, whether it's religion, spirituality, whatever, it's this idea of being able to be more expansive and to be able to not just live the limited mortal existence, but be able to kind of expand beyond that and remember yourself as an aspect of the divine even while you're embodied, right? And so, I know a lot of you have had awakening experiences, or you're able to access the divine in certain moments, but that's a very different situation than walking the world as the divine, than being that in the world, than abiding by that here, doing that work, like letting the words that come out of your mouth be spoken by spirit, not you, right? Giving it all up, right? That all of the analogies of squeezing through the eye of the needle, and all that stuff that we talked about on the call with Dave. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, what if it is all kind of the same, and yet it's really not, right? Because there are aspects clearly in Christianity where the interpretation is it is the only way to salvation. And then there are, I'm much more well versed in that doctrine than in a lot of others, but the similarities that come up is, the divine in all of it, right? And most people in these conversations are willing to acknowledge like one God, right? If even in the polytheistic kind of perspectives, a lot of those lead to this idea of those are aspects of a singularity. We can talk about oneness all day long, but then when we start to get divisive about what Christians believe versus what Jews believe versus what Hindus believe, there any separation at all prevents oneness, right? Because it's a natural duality. So those are some of the things that we're going to address here today, as we kind of deconstruct all of that. But before we do that, we're going to go to a quick break. And of course, I know so many of you wanted to know, how do you get more engaged with us? What is this work that you're doing? How do you access your superpowers, right? So you can go to superpowerexperts.com and click on the Superpower Programs tab. It's a really great way to start dipping your toe into being some of this in the world, into walking that path as the divine, and whether you're a believer or whether you really, really want to believe, it's a great construct to play in a collaborative, safe environment that supports you in your development. So be sure to check that out and stay tuned, because when I come back from the break, we're going to expand on this stuff further. So come right back with us. Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Don Rekla, Executive Director of Superpower Experts, and we want to thank each of you for making Superpower Up the #1 podcast network for personal development and spiritual growth. Because people like you have the courage to say that mindfulness, healthy living, disrupting reality, the pursuit of consciousness, responsible entrepreneurship, and radical parenting matter, we now amass over 1 million downloads monthly in more than 90 countries. Our numbers keep growing because there are far more people willing to live divergently than mass media wants to acknowledge. For you, the change makers, the light bearers, the way showers, we say thank you. If you're ready to take the next step in your evolution, go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the Superpower Quiz. And as Neva Lee Rekla, our youngest podcaster, likes to remind us, remember, we all have superpowers and we can change the world. Awesome. We're back. You're listening to Superpower Up Network, Disrupt Reality. I'm Tonya Don Rekla. And today we're talking about spirit and superpowers. We're expanding on last week's conversation with Dave Stone about living by Christ's design. And I know that brought up a ton of stuff for all of you, right? Like, we get it, we know. And so before the break, I was talking about, how do we kind of stay in oneness, but not kind of say everything's the same, because there is a tendency to water down the messages when that happens. And so it's a very, very fine line that we have to walk there. But before we get back into the complexities of it, I want to touch on this idea of, pride and humility, ego, and self-deprecation. And how do we be this, right? How do we give it all over? Every cell of our body, every word that comes out of our mouth, every breath that we take, give it all over to God, to the divine, in a way that doesn't foster this kind of egotistical, better than everybody else or holier than thou kind of attitude. And it may sound like that should be an easy thing to do, but for anybody who's tried it, it's absolutely not. Because as you start to open up to these gifts, you see things, you know things, you remember things, you listen in a way you never have before, you see in a way that you've never had before, you can feel things in a way that you never have before. And that's where we start to get this development of those clair senses, right? Beyond the 5 traditional senses, there's whole other realms of potentiality that we just can't access until we're attuned to them. And it starts to get kind of heady in the sense of, am I a healer? Am I Jesus? Am I this? Like, I think, most people kind of have this kind of, this moment of what does this mean? And what am I really saying? And What are people going to think, and how do I feel about it? And is this right? Am I misinterpreting this? Because as you start to gain access to divine knowledge and awareness and universal truth, it is kind of hard for the human aspects, for those lower frequency aspects, to not take that and feel better than everybody else, to feel like they are superior to other people. And um, the thing that I know absolutely to be true is that the second you truly step into that space, not just access it, right? There's a difference between sitting in meditation and accessing it versus really truly stepping into it, right? There's a difference between doing a trip on something and accessing the divine, and really truly stepping into it in full conscious awareness. And that moment that you do that, it is undeniable that everybody else is there too, right? Whether or not they're identifying as that or associating as that is neither here nor there. Everybody's there. Everybody understands it. Everybody knows. Everybody gets it in that space. We have layers of forgetfulness that we kind of put ourselves through because there's this developmental process that has to occur, right? No lower frequency stored trauma aspects or constrictions are going to be able to pass into that space. So there is real developmental work that has to be done. But when it comes to spiritual growth, spirit being the essence of that, we already are. We don't have to do anything. In fact, everything that we did prohibits us from remembering that. So it's really, really, really important when we have these discussions that we're delineating between this developmental work, which is, we would call like personal development or whatever it might be, versus spiritual awareness, right? I don't even love calling it spiritual growth because even that's egotistical. Spirit doesn't need to grow. It is, right? It just is. Whether we can access it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. And so strategies that people come up with in personal development, right? The personal work that has to be done in order for you to access that, in order for you to be that, is something very different than coming into awareness about what you already are, right? Nobody has to develop their spirit. They just have to get out of the way. And that's a developmental process, right? To be able to hold that in bigger and bigger ways and in more expansive ways. And that's truly the foundational work behind honing your superpowers, right? And what if superpowers doesn't really appeal to you, then, well, I don't know why you'd be listening to a superpower podcast if superpowers didn't appeal to you. But let's pretend that you stumbled on this and you're like, I don't know. I don't really agree with superpowers. I don't really like it. Who cares? Like, that's just our software, right? That's just our construct. That's just the data as we got it, right? There's millions and millions and millions of other ways to explain this stuff. Don't let that keep you from upgrading your operating system, right? Essentially, that's what's happening here. We're upgrading the body. We're upgrading the essence of who we are, our consciousness, and all of that other stuff. We're upgrading it so that we can remember all of those other layers and everywhere where we exist. Use whatever software you want. Like, if superpowers doesn't appeal to you, go do I don't know, go do yoga or go do what, I don't care. Find another kind of construct that works for you. But don't throw out the process of remembering just because your discerning mind wants to pick apart the software and the topic at hand. That's just laziness, right? That's just relaxing into the resistance of really, truly expanding into these spaces. And that's what our superpower programs are designed to do. Like, they are, we tell people they're kind of like Jedi training, in the sense that it's great that this. Everybody knows this stuff. That's not the issue. The issue is, are we actually doing the work necessary to be able to be this? And that leads us back to the conversation that we had with Dave Stone around what was Christ's intention, right? Did he really mean for us to do miracles like him, like greater things than these you also shall do? Like, did he really mean that, or was he joking, right? And what does that look like? And then does that mean that we think that we are Jesus, that we think that we're better than Jesus? Do we think that we're just right underneath Jesus? Like, how does a hierarchy work in all of this? And those are worthwhile questions to ask, especially if you feel yourself called to serve and administer to people in certain spaces or religious doctrines or whatever stories or mythos or constructs that you just happen to excel in, where your gap exists. It's important that we all come together and have these conversations, because without those, it's easy to think that we're so incredibly different. It's easy to think that one way is superior than another way. And perhaps it is. I'm not interested in arguing the merits of that. What I am interested in doing is illuminating the symbolism and the patterns in it all. And I can guarantee you that if you continue on an expansive journey, walking yourself closer and closer to God, to divine, beingness, to oneness, whatever you want to call it, you will see that there are symbols and threads that tie all of it together. It's just the vantage point that you're at. And so without disregarding any of the pathways that allow you to get there, how do we have conversations that allow for some sort of discussion of difference without being divisive, right? And knowing that we're trying to walk through the duality into oneness, but we have to be able to first look at all of the stories and baggage and constrictions that we have that keep, it doesn't matter how like expansive you want to claim to be, we still access those lower frequencies, and we still can do that as long as we're embodied. That's the agreement. So how do we keep from like sinking into them and being like, oh yeah, well, those are those Christians again, or those are those Jews again, or those are those woo-woo people again, or those are the healers again, or the witches, or what, who cares, right? Like we have to look at the fact that it's all on purpose, right? Because there is the undeniable fact that it exists. And if it exists, it has to be part of the plan. Because if you truly believe in oneness, then nothing exists outside of divinity. Nothing. So be careful what you're pointing at and what you're judging and what you're blaming, because all that's doing is showing us and broadcasting us where your fears lie, where your limitations exist. It says nothing about the construct or about other people. It just tells us where you're at in your developmental journey. And that's fine too, but it's probably not what you think it is. And so when we talk about things like spirit, well, who gets to lay claim over the word spirit, right? Is that a solely Christian term? No, of course not. It's part of the trilogy, but that there were uses of it that predate that construct. Then okay, we'll do does the new age kind of woo-woo crowd get to use spirit and the divine in a different way than the church does? I don't know who gets to lay claim. Like I don't see a lot of trademarks on that stuff. So what if we instead entertain the idea that these containers exist, these words exist? I mean, when you really break it down, these concepts are so incredibly vast. The second we try to think about them, we bastardize them. And then we bastardize them even further the second we try to form them into words. And so to think that the words are pure in their form is just ludicrous, right? So elevate, take an observer stance, step back a little bit and be willing to be even a little bit inquisitive and curious about, well, what if what I thought this was, maybe it's not, or maybe it's more than that. And all of you have had enough experiences pulling back layers of things that you once thought, probably doggedly, that it was this way, only to find a different perspective, or for someone to share a perspective, or for you to awaken to a different perspective that says, oh my gosh, it's something else. Well, if that can happen in one thing, folks, it can happen in all of them. So here's the practical kind of way to apply this knowledge today. As you go about your days, look at your life and really listen to your thoughts. Listen to the words that you're speaking, and ask yourself, like, is that just a story? I love Neva, of course. She's brilliant, and she's 10, and this is the stuff that we practice in our home. And she'll start talking to me, and you can see her mind rolling. It's like, and this is this, and that is that. And then she'll stop and she'll look at me. She goes, or that's just a story I'm telling myself. And it's like, awesome. Tell yourself a story. We tell ourselves story all the time. We talk about superpowers all the time. Like, we believe they exist, but we also recognize that belief creates potentiality. And so tell yourself stories, but be very aware that that's what you're doing, right? And choose. And if you don't like the story, then ask, like, is this true? And does it have to be true? Do I want it to continue being true? If it ever was true, do I want to continue to perpetuate it, right? Because sometimes just that curiosity will break that cycle of, no, I know this to be fact, and allow you just a little bit of space to go, okay, what if? What if? And we're not saying you have to believe. We're just saying, ask the question, what if? What if superpowers are real? What if we can walk the world as the divine? What if that's exactly what Jesus was talking about? And what if we're called into these bigger and bigger spaces? And what if we're already there? And what if the miraculous already exists? And what if that life of freedom and abundance and all of those things that everybody says that they want, what if you already have it, you just can't see it because you refuse to take those layers off? Those are worthwhile questions to ask yourself. So the next time, before you want to disregard something as being something other than what you're comfortable with, ask yourself why. There's no threat to you in that. There's no threat to inquisitiveness, right? I don't know where the whole curiosity killed the cat thing came from, but for most of us, we're not out questing, in dangerous areas and hunting down the dragon to slay. We're sitting in our homes or behind a computer, usually in social media, feeling threatened. And it's like nothing's happening to you, right? So take a breath, expand out a little bit and go, okay, what if what she's saying is true? What if, oh my gosh, this Superpowers show brought on a Christian pastor to talk about Christ's teachings, right? What if there's a connection there? What if we can find the divine in everything and everywhere? And be really cautious what you're broadcasting, especially if you work in these spaces, if you're a practitioner, if you're a coach, if you're somebody like that, and you still hold those judgments and that divisive attitude, and you're spewing it on social media, you're sharing it with your clients, be careful, folks, because that does damage. And any amount of divisiveness does exactly what it's designed to do, which is to keep us separate. And ultimately, all it's doing is keeping you out of oneness. So be cautious with that. I love you all. I know that this is a journey and a half for sure. And none of you have stumbled into this on accident, and it does take effort. And it is disturbing and it is disruptive and it challenges every aspect of everything that we ever thought to be true. But it is worth it, and know that we are here to support you. If you'd like some more support in that path that you're walking, then absolutely go check out the programs page at Superpower Programs. It is what it is, folks. There's a video of me on there. There's all kinds of copy. Our team is amazing. And at the very least with us, you're absolutely going to get transparency and accountability and love. We lead with our hearts and souls, and it's evident by the fact that we now have the #1 podcast network for personal development and spiritual growth, which I'm very excited about. And, and with over 1 million downloads a month, we know that this matters to a whole heck of a lot of you. So you're not alone. And make no mistake about it, folks, we're about 1% of everywhere. So even when you feel like nobody around you understands, there are people who are talking about this, doing it, living it, being it, making money at it, for real, living the life that they want to live. But it's not always what it appears to be. So be true to your path, make sure that you're checking in and making sure that you're clear and that you're in resonance, and be willing to consistently upgrade what you're thinking and what you're believing. All right, folks. Well, until next time, know that we love you and we're here to support you. And, as always, go out, uncover your superpowers, and change the world, everyone. Take care.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the Superpower quiz today.